A few years ago, I wrote a little sequence of poems called Some Women, which was an attempt to give the women of the Bible back their voices. The sequence consists of a series of poems entitled Old Testament, and another part of it is called New Testament. I'm going to read the New Testament poems. The first one is called Martha. When Jesus Christ came to the house of Martha and Mary, Mary washed Christ's feet while Martha was left in the kitchen to get on with the cooking. Martha. Och, Mary just stares up at him like with her big rabbit eyes. But there's pots and pans to be cleaned, isn't there? And feet to wash, and corpses to lay out. I bustle round him and he tells me, "You're an awful bustler, Martha." He remembered my name. Asks me if I think my brother Lazarus will rise again. "He'll rise again on the day of judgment," says I. Says he, "I am the resurrection and the life." Says I, "Well, help me resurrect this bucket for the well. It has a hole in it, and Lazarus will need a bloody good wash when you've finished with him." Virgin. When I was a girl, each time I turned a corner, there was a rustling, as if someone had just left. It was hard to wait until I could be spoken to, and terrifying when the child took root. It was hard to wed an old man just because his gift of withered branches bloomed as I placed them on the altar. Harder still when I noticed how the calm, distracted boy looked right past me to the sunlight at the window. The quietest activist I've ever known, love was a miracle for him. To me, it was real, even when he noticed I was there and turned aside. He preferred men, ate and laughed and slept with them. I feared for him. I placed my hands like wings on his head. He shrugged them off, and after supper in a local park, they arrested him. It was hard to see his fine, emaciated face when I stood beside the bier with the disciple he loved. Mary Magdalene. What I remember is a terrible dream of something hanging nearby above me, just to the right, and I couldn't look up. There was blood. The whiteness was tremendous. What I remember is I was weeping, and I turned to the gardener, who looked like my husband, and I screamed, "The body has gone." He told me to look inside, look within. 2 words. So I think he meant into myself. I tried but found nothing. Their questions never stop. I feel my bones going off to preach on their own, each with a slightly different story. Some days I wear a red dress and sit with my alabaster jar to bring it all back, even the sins. They write it all down. But what good will that do? Start again was his favourite saying. He didn't bleed. The whiteness is tremendous. St. Paul is famous for writing letters to communities of early Christians. So I thought it was about time that some of those early communities wrote back to St. Paul. So this is the first letter of the Hebrew women to St. Paul. Hebrew women, apostles of Christ Jesus, to Paul, alleged saint, notorious scribbler, grace to you and peace from God our Father. Now look here. Adam could have said, no thanks, or apples disagree with me. He didn't. He had a bite as well. So he was deceived, just like Eve. We're equal and get used to it. We washed his feet, made his tea, stood under the cross. Where were you on some road to Damascus? Useless. Chapter 2. This new covenant is all very well, but we have a soft spot for the old one. That tabernacle had our best candlesticks in it, a gold jar with jam by manna, and a lot of tablet. We want it back. You promise this and you promise that. Be quiet. Let the hidden person of the heart speak out. Chapter the last. Every Tom, Dick and Harry's given hospitality at yours in case they might be angels. Fine. But haven't you noticed the spinning saucers we've got above our heads? Faith is a stubborn doubt before what you despair of. and the conviction of things you can see with your own two eyes. After I'd finished this little sequence, a friend of mine said, "What would a New Testament be like today?" And this little poem called Wood came out of that conversation. Heartwood in softwood thought of Adam and the chair back it gave the young gardener. Sapwood in softwood remembered the shadow cast by the apple and bark. Springwood, too young to recall much at all, imagined the coming and going under the palm tree at Timnah, and Corewood still felt the essential pain of being bush in a world thinking itself divine. As Latewood allowed a final sparrow to take its last blood-red berry, they stiffened, began to concentrate on cell length, wall thickness, cellulose crystallinity. Between them they wove their own myths about moisture and fire. They never took Earth for granted. So I'm going to read a couple of poems from the Old Testament section. This first one is about Sarah. And I love the story of Abraham and Sarah because there's lots of laughter in it. Sarah was reputed to be incredibly beautiful, and Abraham was afraid that she would be too much of a temptation to other men. And in order to prevent those other men from killing him, he passed her off as his sister and lent her to those other men. And eventually God got fed up with this and gave Sarah a child when she was in her 90s. Angels are good for a laugh. They come up and they say, "God will give you a child." I laugh and I say, "I'm 90. They stand up indignant, unfold their wings. "You can't laugh at God," one says. I laugh and I say, "I'm 90. They leave in a flap and I have a wee boy called Isaac, whose name means he laughs. I laugh and I say, "I'm 90, but his nappies need changed and he giggles a lot." Life's been a laugh despite all the travel. Abraham gave me to Pharaoh, then Abimelech, passing me off as his sister. Even at 90, I'm pretty enough to tempt rulers to slit my old husband's pendulous wattle. At tea time each night, we laugh at our names, mother and father of multitudes. I'm 90 and he's 99. The Levite's concubine. When they raped me, they said I was second best. All along I knew it was him they fancied, my young husband. Our host wouldn't have it. They could take his virgin daughter instead, but not a man who'd shared his house. My husband, my young husband, wouldn't hear of that. He thrust me forward and slammed the door. I am his second wife. Now he's preparing to cut up my used up body into 12 equal parts to send among the tribes of Israel. They must pay him for his sacrifice. I recall our wedding day, how his first wife gave me to him, a far-off look in her eyes, as if she saw our husband moving further and further away, a man firmly out of reach, summoning his God. And I'll end with just one more poem which is not in this sequence, but which is about religion and also is about cookery in kitchens, and so it seemed appropriate to read this in this particular setting. About a year ago, my brain was hijacked by a Dutch baker and cook called Helga Appeldoom. She steps out of a 17th century Dutch painting, and since then she's been turning up at some of history's great eureka moments. So it's an excuse to bring my delight in food and painting and history together. And in this particular poem, she's been employed by the great French scientist and theologian Blaise Pascal to keep house for him during his final months of life. But he only allows communication by letter. It's reported that Pascal often saw an abyss at the side of his bed and sometimes placed a chair on top of it to remind him that it was an illusion. So this is Pascal to mevrouw Apeldoorn. Pascal to mevrouw Apeldoorn, a gruel of lentils as black as the abyss beside my bed, thinned by water, no bread, only water. The notes accumulate. I skewer them and barely scurry round the kitchen. No contact but by letter. As if I were some girl in a portrait that he's dreamt. He sees me poised between the act of reading and having read, ready to conjure his final frugal meals from moat-filled air. I remember his abyss, a good solid parquet that bore the chair I sat on as he hired me. His face was an abyss, a quill above a maw that told me I must feed his stomach, not his appetite. I soaked his socks in brandy for a little warmth, a little sleep. Pascal to mevrouw Apeldoorn, Jesus will be in agony until the world's end. We must not sleep till then. When you read too quickly or too softly, you hear nothing. And so it was with me and him. I skimmed his notes. He noticed little in my food, but the glimmer of a body real and crucified. I cannot stomach it. I bang my cast iron pots and deal and hope he hears my basement world, which fills me to the brim with all its unused gleams. Pascal to mevrouw Apeldoorn, there is light enough for those who wish to see and enough shadows for those who don't. And so I heaped up shadow upon shadow on my dishes, stomped up the stairs and placed them one by one around the edge of his abyss. A pink blancmange peppered with favours, 2 ripe pears, soft sloughing into hard, a jug of wine, a knife of light. And then I turned my face to him and struck my pose, my hand outstretched, a bridge across the gleaming parquet of infinity, 2 tiny, uncomprehending worlds settling into stillness.